finally, Babylon's going to be judged. So this is Jeremiah's prophecies telling about what's going to happen to Babylon. But the judgment concerning Babylon covers chapters 50 and 51. And you saw that chapter 50 had 40 some odd verses in it, and chapter 51 is going to have 60 some odd verses in it. So when God gets around to judging Babylon, he's got a lot to say about Babylon. All right? So let's pray and we'll ask the Lord's blessing on our study tonight. Well, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks as we gather once again that we're here in a warm place on this winter night. We give you thanks. We're here with people who know and love us and also hunger for your word. And Lord, we ask that as we study Jeremiah, that you'll speak to our hearts and show us the truths that we need to have to live by and to go out and share with others. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. And also, under just historical studies, one thing you're going to want to know, Babylon, like most of the nations at that time, was an idol-worshiping nation, and two of their idol gods were named Bel and Marduk. Okay, Marduk. All right, well, let's start. The first paragraph I broke out from chapter 50 of Jeremiah was verses 1 through 3. Babylon will be captured. This is the word the Lord spoke through Jeremiah the prophet concerning Babylon and the land of the Babylonians. Announce and proclaim among the nations, lift up a banner and proclaim it. Keep nothing back, but say, Babylon will be captured. Bel will be put to shame, Marduk filled with terror. Her images will be put to shame, and her idols filled with terror. A nation from the north will attack her and lay waste her land. No one will live in it. Both people and animals will flee away. First set of questions. Of all the nations on the earth today, which one is the last nation we would ever expect to be defeated by another nation, and why? What's the last country on the face of the earth you'd ever expect to be defeated, and why do we think that? Okay, us, USA. I think that's probably the answer most people would give. Why do we think the USA be the last nation to ever be defeated?
Well, mostly because we've been so rich.
Okay, we're rich in so many ways.
Yep.
Somewhat isolated.
We're somewhat isolated. We used to be. Actually, when this country was founded and the experiment of Republican and democracy was started, some of the early founding fathers said, what helps us is we have an ocean separating us from Europe. It was our isolation that got this country started. And we still have a lot of isolation from a lot of the world, but now a lot of the world is coming up across our open southern border, which our current regime is completely allowing. So we've got the world flooding in here, but we are still relatively isolated. Okay. Why else would we say America be the last nation to be defeated?
Because we've been the strongest in the world for a long time.
Okay. We've built a reputation of being the big guy on the block. Conflicts around the world, anytime the United States throws its weight behind one side or the other, that side usually wins. You might think of World War I, World War II. We've got the strength of our military, right? Okay. And then lastly, history buffs might know, why did the Emperor of Japan decide it would be very unwise to invade America during World War II? What kept the Japanese from invading our shores on our land? And because we all have guns.
Yeah.
Literally, he just said it would be, the amount of guns in that country would be way too costly. It would be a fight all across the land because we're armed like no other nation, even the people. So yeah, so there's some reasons, and we could probably go on with some more. But America probably is the last nation on earth you'd expect to fall. Now, why would it be such big news prophecy for Jeremiah to announce the fall of Babylon? Why was that like big news? Very similar. They were the world power at the time. Nobody could defeat Babylon. They were rolling across the known world, taking every kingdom they came up against. Okay. Why is it important to God that we know in advance that Bel will be put to shame and Marduk filled with terror?
For our encouragement.
Okay.
God
Yep.
will take care.
Yep. But also, what were Bel and Marduk that God wanted everybody to know they're going down?
Idols.
They were idols. So God's saying, they're not going to stand against me. They're not even real gods. So it wasn't just the Babylonian people, it was the gods they worshipped that God wanted to take down and judge, if you will, and let them know they have no power. So their idols were brought into part of the judgment here in the conflict. Now I want you to think about verse 3. There's a phrase there. A nation from the north will attack her and lay waste her land. Where have we heard that before?
Earlier in this chapter.
And earlier in Jeremiah. In fact, we've heard it several times. The warnings keep coming. The warnings keep coming. A nation from the north will attack and lay waste her land. This was the judgment pronounced over Israel. And of course, the nation from the north was Babylon. And now, guess what? Same thing is going to happen to Babylon. All right? But Medo-Persia, the Medes and the Persians combined are going to be who takes down Babylon. All right? And it's coming. In fact, Daniel is in Babylon at the time that happened, and then he became an advisor to those kings. Okay? So if history repeats itself, what can the greatest nation on earth today expect?
Well, same.
Yeah, it doesn't.
We're not exempt.
Exactly. History repeats itself, and the greatest nations of the world come down too. So we can expect that. We are not unbeatable or irreplaceable. All right, second paragraph here. I broke out. I called not to be forgotten. This is verses 4 through 7. And by the way, this is what I think is neat. Here's a judgment on Babylon in the first paragraph leading off. And then God's going to go back to his people. And then he's going to go back to Babylon. And then we're going to flip back to God's people eventually. So it's almost like the greatest nation of the world is coming down. And then there's this nation that's not a nation because they've been destroyed. They have no territory. They have no borders. They are more like a people, but not a nation anymore. But they're not being forgotten by God. Okay. So let's take a look at this second paragraph. Verses 4 through 7. In those days, at that time, declares the Lord, the people of Israel and the people of Judah together will go in tears to seek the Lord their God. They will ask the way to Zion and turn their faces toward it. They will come and bind themselves to the Lord in an everlasting covenant that will not be forgotten. My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray and caused them to roam on the mountains. They wandered over mountain and hill and forgot their own resting place. Whoever found them devoured them. Their enemies said, we are not guilty, for they sinned against the Lord, their verdant pasture, the Lord, the hope of their ancestors. All right, second set of questions. How do we tell where different nations are located today?
Borders.
Yeah, borders. You are now entering, right? Yeah, most of them have very clearly demarcated borders. By the way, the United States has very clearly demarcated borders. It's just that they're not enforced on our southern side. On our northern side, what do you think it's like to try to go from the United States to Canada or Canada to the United States? Oh my gosh, it's tough. All right. Yeah, it depends on who you are, where you're coming from, and what the agenda is, right? Okay. Now, at Babylon's fall, where are the people of Israel and Judah?
In Babylon.
Yeah, scattered all over through it. Yep. So they are in, the people of Israel and Judah are in this nation of Babylon that's going to fall. How do verses 6 through 7 describe a people with no nation? What do you see there? It just describes a people but with no nation. Verses 6 and 7.
Lost sheep. Another shepherd.
Yep. Led astray. Where they roam? Up on the mountains. They forgot their own resting place. It's because they haven't seen it in so long. And whoever's found them has devoured them. So they don't even have a safe place. All right. That's why nations have borders and boundaries, by the way. They want to have a safe place for their people. This is ours. You know, we're going to defend this. And you should have an expectation of being reasonably safe and secure if you're there. Now, at that time in history, what territory do they, meaning Israel and Judah, possess or control? At that time in history, what territory did they control? None. They were a landless people. That's all they were at this point, landless people. And yet, what does verse 5 say Israel and Judah will do, and what will its impact have on their future? Verse 5 says they're going to bind themselves to the Lord. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, we all have a spiritual life, okay? Every one of us here has a prayer life. We have a Bible reading that we do at home. We pursue a relationship with God. In different ways, we are binding ourselves to the Lord, right? In that relationship. And when they bind themselves to the Lord, what's the impact going to be? Right now, there are people with no nation, but they will not be what?
They won't be forgotten.
Forgotten. Yeah, no, they won't be forgotten. God is going to bless and protect them. They will not be forgotten, even though right now they're just a people that are sprinkled through this other nation called Babylon. So, based on verse 5 then, and again, verse 5 is binding themselves to the Lord in an everlasting covenant, and they will not be forgotten. What people are going to have the most secure future among all the nations? All the nations in the world, what people will have the most secure future?
The Jews.
The Jews, and also those of us who have been grafted in. Those of us who have bound ourselves to the Lord. So what I drew out of this paragraph is the most important thing for a safe and secure future is not to have a nation, and ultimately it's not even to have a firm border on the southern border, although we need a firm border on the southern border. But the most important thing is to bound yourself to the Lord. Because Babylon right now at that time in history was the strongest nation in the world. They were going down. But the people who had a hope and a future were the ones who had bound themselves to the Lord. So there's a huge lesson for us tonight. All right, let's take a look at our third paragraph. This is verses 8 through 13 of chapter 50. I titled it, Flee Babylon, because that's what God said to do. Flee out of Babylon, leave the land of the Babylonians, and be like the goats that lead the flock. I will stir up and bring against Babylon an alliance of great nations from the land of the north. They will take up their positions against her, and from the north she will be captured. Their arrows will be like skilled warriors who do not return empty-handed. So Babylonia will be plundered. All who plundered her will have their fill, declares the Lord. Because you rejoice and are glad, you who pillage my inheritance, because you frolic like a heifer threshing grain, and neigh like stallions, your mother will be greatly ashamed. She who gave you birth will be disgraced. She will be the least of the nations, a wilderness, a dry land, a desert. Because of the Lord's anger, she will not be inhabited, but will be completely desolate. All who pass Babylon will be appalled. They will scoff because of all her wounds. Set of questions number 3. If you were going to flee the United States to go to another land for greater safety and security, where would you go? Is there any place we might go if we're going to flee the USA? What's that? No, I think I heard Doug say Cancun. Where else might we go to flee if we're gonna flee the United States to find safety and security? Where else could you go? I think Mexico proper's out.
Bill wants to go to Belize.
Okay, Belize. And I don't know a lot about Belize, but I know there's a lot of expatriates, they call them, Americans who've gone down there.
But we really don't know the political situation now.
Yeah.
What about Iceland? You were there.
Yeah, Iceland's pretty safe.
It was.
Cold.
I was going to say, we might pick a land to go to that's like really not desirable so that people would just leave you alone. You know? Costa Rica? Yeah, I'm not sure where I go because quite frankly, we probably have a hard time imagining any place that's more safe or secure than America. For us. Right? Okay. Well, listen. What does the word of the Lord tell those living in Babylon to do in verse 8? What does he tell them to do? Flee. All right. So they're thinking, why? Why would fleeing Babylon seem like a ludicrous idea to the Babylonians? Yeah, they're the greatest nation in the world. They are militarily the most powerful, scientifically the most advanced, okay, at that time in history. All right, so they just think, what? Flee Babylon and go where? Their mindset would kind of be like ours at first blush. Flee America and go where? You know, where could it be more safe and secure?
Get on a boat and hang out in the ocean.
There you go, yeah.
Go cruising.
Yeah. Made it. Okay. All right, so in spite of the fact that the Babylonians can't imagine why they would want to flee Babylon, what does verses 9 and 10 tell us is going to happen to Babylon? Verses 9 and 10.
She was captured.
Yeah, it's going down. Yeah. An alliance of nations is coming. It's actually going to be plundered. People are going to take whatever they want. All right, so you want to get out of there. But God says, this is what's coming. Now, check out verse 13. Verse 13. What is the reason that all these things are going to happen?
Because of the Lord's anger.
Yeah, you made God angry. That's why this is happening. Because of the Lord's anger, this is all going to happen to you. What nation do you think God might be the angriest with today, and why? Of all the nations in the world. What nations do you think God might be most angry with?
China, no?
Okay, we might say China because of the cruelty that's going on there.
I say us.
Okay,
To be honest,
us.
I don't think he's happy about too much at all.
Yeah, and we might say us because our nation was started out like the nation of Israel. You realize God judged the nation of Israel so hard because they were his chosen people, and then they turned on him. America was founded with the Mayflower Compact before the Pilgrims ever got off the boat and set foot on the seashore. All right, they were going to dedicate themselves to God. That's the kind of nation they wanted to build. And there was a covenant, and God has blessed this nation so much. But God might be most angry with us because we've gone against the compact.
That's right.
We have. And what are some of the things that, well, like China. Let's start off with China. Somebody said China first. What's going on in China that God might be really angry with?
Genocide.
Okay, genocide.
Yeah.
The slaughtering of people in that nation. The Uyghurs, also Muslims, Christians. Also, I had a message a while back that got kind of graphic, but just talking about the torture that's going on to these people. Some of the things they are doing to these people in those detention camps. It's insane, gruesome, awful, to keep the people terrorized. All right, complete control, no freedom. The people aren't even free to choose to worship, which, by the way, that's why underground church is so powerful there. And it's also why they're trying to stamp it out, because it's dangerous. China's dangerous to its people, the Communist Party, but the church is dangerous to the party. Okay?
Yeah.
How about in America? What might God be angry about?
The abortions.
Okay. Sacrificing of children.
Sexual sins.
They're trying to get the children to
Yep. Sexual sins.
do things.
The changing of identity so that we reject the way God made us. Yeah. I heard a statistic. I was listening to, right about noontime, I was in the barn. I think it's Chip Ingram comes on, and he has a show. He's on vacation, so somebody else was substitute preaching for him. And this speaker was talking about America's idols. And he said one of them is pornography. It's an idol in this country.
I know.
But this is what was unbelievable to me. He said pornography is so big in America, and I've already shared with you this statistic. I think a new pornographic movie is produced in America I think it's like 11 to 15 minutes and released out to the world on the internet. Well, this particular speaker the other day, he was giving some statistics, and he said, think about all the money that country music generates, rock and roll music generates, hip hop generates, and classical music, the whole music industry. All that money, you add it all up, pornography generates more. And then he said, this is even more hard to believe. He said, you take all the money that the NFL generates, combine it with all the money the National Hockey League generates, combine it with all the money that the NBA generates, combine it with all the money Major League Baseball generates, put it all together, it will still not add up to as much as the pornography industry in this country. That's how big it is. So we have no idea when Kay says pornography, I guarantee. Because it turns people into sexual objects, but then once the beauty fades or whatever, it's like then we're thrown away. You know what I'm saying? Like that's our value, really? You know?
And then they idolize movie stars and pop stars. They even call themselves idols.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and what was that TV show a while back, American Idol? You know, a contest to become one? Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it combine all those things, but the fact that we turned on our purpose and our original foundations, and we allowed it to happen. You know. All right. Well, so does anybody want to pick another nation that God might be angry with, or we good on China and the United States?
Russia.
Okay, Russia will be another one. Okay, what's going on in Afghanistan? The cruelty there. Yeah. Yep. And the persecution of God's people. Iran. All right. So, what then might be the key to national security and personal safety? Remember, if all these things came about because God was angry, what is the key to national security and personal safety today? Beg forgiveness and don't make God angry.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of like when we were growing up when we were kids. Who did we learn was the first person you do not want to make angry?
Your dad.
Your dad. Yeah. And secondly, your mom.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes mom would deal with her anger with you by saying, wait till your father gets home. You know what I mean? So all I'm going to say is that kind of fear, that I think that's the kind of fear we're supposed to have, the fear of the Lord. We want to fear making God angry. We don't want him angry with us because this is what he does to nations. And I do believe, I don't care how great your military is. I don't care how much wealth we have. I think our greatest thing we can do is make sure you and I are not making God angry. God bless you, Julie. All right. Well, let's move on to the fourth paragraph now. We're kind of cruising through these, actually. Verses 14 through 16, I called Take Up Your Positions. God says, take up your positions around Babylon, all you who draw the bow. Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she has sinned against the Lord. Shout against her on every side. She surrenders, her towers fall, her walls are torn down. Since this is the vengeance of the Lord, take vengeance on her. Do to her as she has done to others. Cut off from Babylon the sower and the reaper with his sickle at harvest. Because of the sword of the oppressor, let everyone return to their own people. Let everyone flee to their own land. Fourth set of questions here. What nations today might be positioning themselves to attack America? And if you see them as positioning themselves, what are they doing? How are they doing to position themselves?
North Korea.
Okay, North Korea. What would North Korea be doing to position itself?
Missiles.
Okay, they're developing missiles, and they're looking for, I think, what is it? Supersonic, hypersonic, is that the word? In other words, things that travel fast so they can't be intercepted and at low altitudes to deliver warheads. North Korea's working on those, so they would be positioning themselves. Who else? China, okay. What do we see China doing that they would be positioning themselves to attack us?
Didn't they run the hypersonic?
Same things.
Across our land, we didn't know it or something.
Yep, their weapons tests.
Yeah, they're doing a lot on the economy side.
Okay. Yep, China is advancing its tentacles for economic warfare all over. They're building ports. What they're doing is going into different, we call them third world countries. I don't know if there is one anymore, but anyway, they're helping develop nations, but in return, they're indebted to China. But even more importantly, part of the deal is they are going into nations of strategic importance where they can build deep water ports to have their navies dock. Also on the economic side, and by the way, China's got a 100-year plan. You do know that, right? They have something called the 100-year plan, where they were going to take 100 years to become the strongest nation in the world. And you can read about it.
They're almost here.
They are gaining, yep. And one of the things they've done is they've taken manufacturing, all right, and we've given all of our manufacturing to them because we can make more profits with cheap goods. So we surrendered manufacturing, so now they make everything. Right? So now if they were to attack, we can't resupply because we can't manufacture some of the very things we need for our own munitions. For instance, did you know no lead is produced in the United States anymore? It's not. Yep, it's no longer mined because we've shut down due to environmental reasons, but China's going full bore. So the lead in your pencils, the lead for our bullets, it's coming across the ocean from China. It's crazy. How else would they be positioning themselves? How about in the technological race? What do?
A lot of cyber warfare.
Okay, cyber warfare, stealing of secrets. The United States is really, really tops in innovation. We are. But they leap ahead because it takes years to innovate and produce these new concepts and ideas. They steal that and go into production and boom. So they're keeping up with us constantly. They've got rules for companies doing business in the United States. So if they're going to do business in China or whatever these partnerships and things are produced, they have to give all their proprietary information to China. So China's got all their, the secret information of how things are developed and run, part of the deal. Yeah. So there's economy, there's weapons. Oh, how about in their own military production? We talked last week about the number of ships China has compared to the United States and other nations of the world, but how many they are set to have by the year 2025 and the year 2030. They will have the world's largest navy. And of course, at the same time, they're developing all these ports. They're developing artificial islands between the United States and China. It's closer to China than us, but literally, they're I don't know, what are they doing? Taking concrete and dumping it in the ocean or whatever and building this up?
Dredge from one place, just put it in another place.
Yeah, but building it up, so they've got an island off there, miles and miles off their coast, but it's another place to stage from. Get that much closer to the coast of California and Washington. Yeah. So China really is positioning itself. Okay, they are. Any other nation you could think of that might be positioning itself to attack?
I wouldn't trust Russia either.
Yeah, Arabs, Afghanistan.
Sure. Yeah.
All their cells.
Yep. Terrorist cells. Who knows when the next attack is going to come? That could hurt our nation. They certainly positioned themselves when they attacked us on 9/11, didn't they? Yeah. They did a very small force, relatively, but a strategic strike that rocked this country.
The people from Mexico, they're coming from many different countries.
Okay.
So they're attacking us.
Yep, they are attacking us softly, if you will, but bringing in all kinds of people, making all kinds of money, but with the drugs, with fentanyl. I thought it was kind of interesting, wasn't it? Was it in Hartford, Connecticut, where the junior high student died of a fentanyl overdose, and they had just a huge amount of fentanyl was around the school in different places, and they were trying to figure out where it came from and how it got to the school. And I'm like, you don't know? It came right up through Joe Biden's open border. And by the way, most of the fentanyl is produced in China, and it comes through Mexico. So there's a partnership right there with the drug cartels and the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to play with this to say there are nations in the world right now that are positioning themselves to defeat us. And by the way, we're going right along with it. Our leaders are, because as long as they keep their pockets lined, they'll sell us down the river. Okay. All right. Well, that's our opening question. Let's dig into where this is going. In verse 14, what does God command the nations attacking Babylon to do? He says, take up what? Take up your positions. Okay, take up your positions. Now, what is the greater significance of this assault on Babylon, and what is to be done to her? What's the greater significance of what's going on here? It's in verse 15, underline.
Vengeance.
Yeah. In other words, you're assaulting Babylon, but this is the vengeance of the Lord. And God says, so take vengeance on her and do to her as she has done to others. And I don't know if you remember different illustrations and things I've shared from messages in the past, but one of the things they used to do in that day was after they defeated a nation, they would take thousands of captives back to Babylon, and they would line them up outside of their streets or outside of the capital as the victorious army and the victorious king came home, and they might take a line, a string, and they would run it down, and wherever the string fell, if you were inside or outside, you'd be executed. And then they'd walk down a few more, stretch out the string, you'd be executed. But also what they would often do is have all these captives lay down across the road, and the army, the victorious army, would march over their bodies, and they'd ride their horses over them and drive their chariots over them. And then if you survived that, obviously you were crippled, and then they would beat the tar out of you if you didn't work as a slave and if you weren't. So, I mean, just cruel. Even their victory parades were full of torture and cruelty, what they did to people. So the Babylonians were famous for this kind of thing. They were also known to put hooks in the noses and mouths of their captives and put them on a cord and lead them and, give it a jerk you around like a fish out of water. If you didn't keep going or if you got tired, they might ride a horse and force you to walk and run and keep up. So just all sorts of things. So God is saying, this is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance on her. Do to her as she has done to others. So if you hear that, wouldn't that just terrify you if you'd been cruel? So that's the greater significance. And God is telling it's ultimately the Medes and the Persians, take up your positions, all right, and do to her as she has done. Now, when any great nation falls, what should we be looking for in its fall then? What should we realize is going on when a great nation falls?
God's wrath.
Yeah. In other words, in fact, I was kind of in a hurry to get this wrapped up, but I was going to reference the scripture that says God raises up kings and God tears them down. Same with nations. So we need to realize when a great nation like Babylon or even the United States should fall, God's angry and God's judgment is behind it. There's a significance here. It doesn't happen by circumstance or happenstance. All right, so yes, the wrath of the Lord is behind it if they've made God angry, and people have been making God angry for a long time. All right. Okay, our fifth paragraph now, verses 17 through 22. Remember I said it starts out with Babylon, flips to God's people, flips back to Babylon. Now we're back to the people of Israel. So verses 17 through 22 I called the Lord gathers his flock. Starting in verse 17. Israel is a scattered flock that lions have chased away. The first to devour them was the king of Assyria. Remember, Assyria came down from the north and took Israel, but didn't take Judah. The last to crush their bones was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar came down through, and he took out Assyria on his way down through and took out Judah. Therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. I will punish the king of Babylon and his land as I punished the king of Assyria. But I will bring Israel back to their own pasture, and they will graze on Carmel and Bashan. Their appetite will be satisfied on the hills of Ephraim and Gilead. In other words, they're coming home. In those days, at that time, declares the Lord, search will be made for Israel's guilt, but there will be none, and for the sins of Judah, but none will be found, for I will forgive the remnant I spare. Attack the land of Merathim and those who lived in Pekod. Pursue, kill, and completely destroy them, declares the Lord. Do everything I have commanded you. The noise of the battle is in the land, the noise of great destruction. Fifth set of questions. First, on American currency, what does e pluribus unum mean? Okay, out of the many, one. Out of the many, one. Yeah. And by the way, current commentary on today's American culture is out of the one, we are disintegrating into the many. Everybody's given an axe to grind and something divisive between us. Right down to the decisions you and I have made about our own health care. That's supposed to divide us now. Okay. All right. Now, what was the state of God's people in verse 17? Verse 17, the state of God's people. Okay, they're scattered all over. All right, scattered. Who was the first and who was the last to devour and crush God's chosen people? Yep, Assyria first, Babylon last. And yet, in spite of their scattered state, what does God promise he's going to do for them in verse 19? It's going to bring them back. These people with no land, these people of no nation, they're going to come back home again. That's what God's promising to do for them. And although God judges each nation in turn, what will Israel's relationship be with the Lord in verse 20? They'll be innocent because God did what for them? Forgave. Yeah, they'll be forgiven. So, see, here's the difference in these nations. God's going to judge all of the nations in turn. In fact, God used Babylon to judge Israel, but then God is going to use the Medes and the Persians to judge Babylon. But here's the difference. God's going to judge their sin, judge their sin, judge their sin. But for his people, after he has judged them, he's going to forgive them. So they've got something from God these other people don't. And it'll come from a relationship with him. So, thinking back to E pluribus unum, where can we find the only true strength in oneness today? Where can we find true strength in oneness? It's not oneness out of many nations becoming one, but it's oneness with who? Yep, in the church, with God. It's our spiritual relationships with him. That's where true strength is going to be found. You stop and think, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, every time he conquered a nation, he took the brightest and best captives back home with him to serve in his cabinet, and and to be a school of wisdoms, to make good decisions, and counselors and advisors. So even Nebuchadnezzar basically took E pluribus unum. He brought people from all of these cultures to enrich Babylon, to make them Babylonians. Even they were going to fall, but those who had a relationship with God, they were the ones that were coming back home. So if you're looking for a place to become one, for instance, the man who currently sits in the White House, he promised, one of his campaign speeches was he was going to bring unity back to America. Well, first of all, no, he hasn't. But secondly, that's not where our safety and security comes from anyway. It's not oneness with the people around us. It's oneness with God. And by the way, then that's what's going to bring unity, because we love and forgive each other. We respect each other. We honor each other. That's where you get oneness from. And that's what America was built on in the first place, which is why so many different cultures could come together and become one. Because we had this basis, this set of values, and it came out of the scripture, and it was oneness with God first. In fact, if anything has given me respect for people of other nations and cultures, because we deal with all kinds of people in our business, but if anything helps me, when people come with language barriers, lots of times we have problems because people don't have the right set of assumptions or understand what we communicate. So it just generates problems. You know what I'm saying? It's not good or evil. It generates problems. But what has helped me in operating our business with people from all over the world is the fact that God loves them as much as he loves me. So when I get a little frustrated, I have to simmer myself down, because Jesus loves them as much as he loves me. See? But that's the basis or the foundation that I approach everyone with. That's where you get out of the many one. It's your unity, and a nation building really comes out of oneness with God. That's where the relationship starts. It really does. That's where we learn to value each other. Love each other, not seek each other's destruction. But even if we're different, that's what is tolerant. All right? These people that are crying tolerance today, they are the most intolerant people you'll ever see. And I love what Dale said on his way out of church one day. It's funny that the speed conversations we have as we greet each other at the door. Dale said something to the effect of, you know what? I don't get all these people that want tolerance. You're vaccinated, I'm not, we're different. Let's be diverse and tolerant. That's diversity, but they won't accept it. Yeah, well, and here again, I just heard about a individual in our discussion group that I'm on, that a fella's mother-in-law, her doctors refused to see her and give her medical care for conditions that are chronic, that he's treated her for years, because she hasn't gotten vaccinated. Refusing service over that. And it's like, what? especially when now the vaccines are effective, not effective. Nobody knows, but see, now they're refusing medical treatment in the United States of America. Really? You know.
I knew that was calling.
Oh, sure it is. And this is just the beginning, I guarantee.
I know.
So anyhow, if you want a nation that's one, if we want to restore unity, it's all got to start with our relationship with Jesus. Every single person. Yeah. Like for instance, if you're a follower of Allah and Islam, well, what do they teach to do with people who are different, with the infidels? Kill them. See? But what does Jesus tell us to do with our enemies? Love them. See?
Pray for 'em.
Pray for them. Yeah, see? You want unity? It starts with our relationship with Jesus. So there's a sermon out of this paragraph too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump to the next one. What's that, Kate?
Love them to death.
Yeah, love them to death. That's right. All right, our sixth paragraph now. Sixth paragraph is verses 23 through 34. It's called A Shattered Hammer. So verse 23. How broken and shattered is the hammer of the whole earth. How desolate is Babylon among the nations. See, God used Babylon to hammer and judge on all the nations. I set a trap for you, Babylon, and you were caught before you knew it. You were found and captured because you opposed the Lord. The Lord has opened his arsenal and brought out the weapons of his wrath. For the sovereign Lord Almighty has work to do in the land of the Babylonians. Come against her from afar. Break open her granaries. Pile her up like heaps of grain. Completely destroy her and leave her no remnant. Kill all her young bulls. Let them go down to the slaughter. Woe to them, for their day has come, the time for them to be punished. Listen to the fugitives and refugees from Babylon, declaring in Zion how the Lord our God has taken vengeance for his temple. See, remember, the Babylonians destroyed the temple of God. Okay? And by the way, all those captives were hauled off to Babylon. God's saying now there's going to be fugitives running from Babylon back to where? The land of Israel. Yep. Okay, continuing on. Summon archers against Babylon, all those who draw the bow, and camp all around her. Let no one escape. Repay her for her deeds. Do to her as she has done. For she has defied the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, her young men will fall in the streets. All her soldiers will be silenced in that day, declares the Lord. See, I am against you, you arrogant one, declares the Lord Almighty. For your day has come, the time for you to be punished. The arrogant one will stumble and fall, and no one will help her up. I will kindle a fire in her towns that will consume all who are around her. This is what the Lord Almighty says. The people of Israel are oppressed, and the people of Judah as well. All their captors hold them fast, refusing to let them go. Yet their Redeemer is strong. The Lord Almighty is his name. He will vigorously defend their cause, so that he may bring rest to their land, but unrest to those who live in Babylon. All right, our sixth set of questions. First of all, what kinds of traps do nations or leaders typically fall into? What kinds of traps do you think a nation or a leader might typically fall into? Like, I'll give you this one. Our most recent president, Donald Trump, what trap did he fall into? Seems like every day he demonstrated.
Oh, his arrogance.
Arrogant. Yep, he's an arrogant man. Everything's the biggest, the best, the mostest, the fastest. And how many people helped him do it?
Himself.
Yeah, none. He did it all himself. See, the man was arrogant. It was a trap he fell into. Okay? But what other traps do nations and leaders typically fall into? Greed. They don't know when to stop, do they? All right. For instance, Nebuchadnezzar. When did he finally have enough kingdoms under his rule? Yeah, when he had the next one. Well, when he had the next one, well, then there was another one on the other side of that. He was trying to go all the way to Egypt. In fact, he did go all the way to Egypt. Okay? So greed, they don't know when to stop. And also for money, right? And they ruin themselves. They get entrapped with bribes. Okay? Yep. Just abusing their power and they can never have enough of it.
If we make alliances with countries that go against what God's standard is,
Okay?
then
Alliances that just go against everything that's right. For instance, to think about all the nations in Europe who are members of NATO. Why was NATO formed? Who are they trying to contain?
Russia, probably.
Russia. And yet, what two nations does the Nord Stream pipeline connect for gas? Russia and Germany. Would Germany be the most powerful NATO nation after the United States, maybe? Okay. But anyway, so they've got this huge alliance that we're a part of to contain Russia, and then Germany is becoming reliant on the enemy for their natural gas to heat their nation's homes. What? So there's another trap we fall into, these alliances, just like the United States. How many big corporations today have fallen into an alliance with China, and now they're relying on them for their goods and products, and come on. We can't even make a bullet without asking them for some lead. Stupid. You think of any other traps? These are good. Okay, the belief that they're infallible. We can't be beaten. Yeah, I sincerely believe that. Yeah, a lot of nations think they're infallible. And by the way, a lot of leaders think they won't get caught. We've got a lot of those in D.C.
They cover for each other. So
They cover for each other.
they won't probably get caught.
Yeah. For instance, not for nothing, but how many times did you hear Donald Trump say he's going to lock up Hillary Clinton?
He'd like to, he can't.
Well, I'm not so sure he couldn't. But here's my take. He kept campaigning on he's going to lock up Hillary, crooked Hillary, and expose her, right? She destroyed evidence, which right there will put you in prison. And she did things that were literally against the law, even for her as Secretary of State. And all I'm going to say is this. I do believe Donald Trump could have put her in prison, but it's like Jan said, they look out for each other. So let's say out of his sense of justice, Donald Trump wanted to put her in prison. I sincerely believe the Clinton camp had dirt on Donald Trump, and
Oh, yeah.
they can't make a move because you want to hold somebody to justice. They say, oh yeah, you do this to me, I'm going to let them know this about you. It's a trap they fall into when they get dirty. They do. Okay? Yeah. They get bribed, blackmailed. Okay, here's another trap then. If you want to bring up President Biden. President Biden never campaigned to be president, did he?
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't. He did not campaign. He did not work for votes. So he was the shoe-in. And if you believe in election fraud, which for the record, I do. But anyway, I had to say that, Joseph. But anyway, point being, if you believe in election fraud and the guy never campaigned, then as president of the United States, he was selected and put in there. All right?
Yeah.
So here's my point. How beholden is he to the people who put him in there? See, Trump was his own president, and he got himself in trouble right and left and all over the place, but there was no question who was running the show. All right? On the other hand, Biden, you don't know who's running the show, but it's clear he's not in control. He doesn't even have the mental capacity to be in control. The poor man doesn't. The mental acumen it's not there. It's not the sharpness. So here again, there's another trap that nations and leaders fall into. If you're going to let me be president, he has to be their puppet. See what I'm saying? All right. Well, listen. So I really wanted to play with that, the traps that nations and leaders fall into. Now, let's take a look at the traps for Babylon. Okay. How does God refer to Babylon in verse 23, first of all, and what is its condition? He calls Babylon a what?
broken and shattered and desolate.
Yep, it's a hammer, but it's broken and shattered. For instance, how did God use Babylon like a hammer on the other nations?
Came down hard.
Yeah, came down hard, broke them up, right? And Babylon just couldn't be beaten. And yet, what's the condition of Babylon now that God's bringing? They're going to be shattered and broken. Okay? By the way, to the best of my knowledge, well, no, I take this back. I was going to say, I've never seen a shattered, broken hammer, but I've shattered and broken the handles on them. But I will say this, though, I've had some post malls that were, softer metal that I managed to put nicks and dings in. But literally, it's pretty hard to break the hammer, isn't it? Okay? All right, so that's what God calls them, but their condition is broken, shattered. What did God set for Babylon, though? He says, I have set a trap. Yep, I have set a trap. And how did the trap work? Was it pretty good? Yeah, they went right into it. Okay. What did God have to do in the land of the Babylonians? Verse 25. What did God have to do in the Babylonian land?
He has work to do.
He has work to do. God just says, I have work to do in the land of Babylon. So this is what I want to ask, and there's several different answers I see in play here. If God had work to do in Babylon, what do you think that work was? What do you think the work was that God had to do?
Bringing down their idols.
Okay.
Faith in idols.
Bring down the idols. Boom. What else?
Set those people free.
Set his people free. He's going to bring his people out in a miraculous way, right? And by the way, the miraculous way, when the Medes and the Persians took over, it was King Cyrus who actually released the Jews to go back to start rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple, and King Cyrus funded it. So you see, their enemies and their captors actually paid for them to go home and be free. See, that's miraculous. Okay. What else? What other work might God have had to do in the land of Babylon? For instance, God had used Babylon to judge all the nations of the world, but now whose turn was up? Babylon, so he's going to judge their sin. And lastly, there's a phrase that I connect with prophecy and several different times. We should probably Bible Gateway this one, okay? But we ought to enter in and do a search sometime and see how many times the phrase approves, so that the world will know, or that they will know, there is a God in Israel. So I think God's work in Babylon was all of these things combined. But it's to show the world there's a God, and it's me, the way he went about things. But God said, I've got work to do in the land of Babylon. So by the way, what kind of work do you think God has to do in our land? Oh, okay. What was the reason for all the destruction in verse 29? Verse 29, what's the reason given?
Defiled the Lord.
Yeah, she's defied me, he says. I'm going to repay her because she defied me. And then skip down to verse 31. Why was God so against them?
Because they're arrogant.
Arrogance. Yeah. Arrogance and defying God. They kind of go together, don't they? They defy God and they're arrogant. How will God turn the tables in verses 33 and 34? You see a turn of the tables. What's God going to do for the people of Israel? Their Redeemer is strong. The Lord Almighty is his name. He's going to defend their cause and bring rest to their land. God's going to turn the tables. And who, by the way, is going to have no rest? The Babylonians. God will turn the tables. Okay? So, no matter what we're going through, personally or in our lives, just remember, God's going to turn the tables. All right? Because he is our Redeemer, and he is what? Strong. Okay? He's strong. Now, what examples of arrogant defiance against God can we see in our nation today? Where can we see arrogant defiance against God today? What are we doing?
People that are taking over that aren't hiding it, they just think they can't be taken down, so they just put it out in the open.
Okay, in your face, right? Let's see you do something about it. And they break God's laws. They break our own constitutional laws. How many times is the man who currently sits in the White House, I can't call him a president, the man who sits in the White House, how many times has he said, well, the Supreme Court's probably going to say it's unconstitutional, but we're going to do it anyway? Literally, I've heard him say that on 2 or 3 issues now. And it's like, There is no law to be respected anymore. We're going to do it anyway. What are you going to do about it? Where else are we just arrogantly defying God? One way I see really is how we are teaching children now in schools
Yes.
to reject the way God has made them.
Yes.
You know, and making them gender fluid, the most basic identity God has given to us. I mean, as you and I grow and mature and develop, we develop an identity. You know what I'm saying?
We were never taught that. We were never taught something.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, no.
Or,
It's because our parents and our school teachers back then didn't want to confuse us. But the most, like for instance, several of us in here have developed an identity as having served in our country, in the military, right? But that's just an identity you built, and you've moved on from there. It's like our identities keep growing and growing. But what's the most basic identity we started with? It's a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
And they want to confuse all this? Well, it's to destroy the family. It is. It's to destroy people. It's to weaken us as a nation. It really is. Yeah.
Boy, they sure fall in the traps, don't they?
Oh,
Of doing
these
that.
are
They
traps.
should know
Yeah.
better.
And for instance, think about when you guys served in the military, okay? The focus was on basically killing the enemy in whatever branch you were in, or supporting those who are killing the enemy. You know what I'm saying? As an auxiliary. But my point would be this. Now, in today's military, they're working on worrying about whether you're a boy or a girl and want to change. And it's like, what? That's what we focus on? And respecting people who are confused about their identity? See? So there's a trap we're falling into, and that's arrogant defiance of God. It really is. Yeah, we've taken every single thing we can do with sexuality, and we've screwed it up. Literally. Yeah. Where else do we
You ought to
arrogant?
read Romans 1,
Yeah. Yep. Romans 1.
26 or something.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you what you have to do is you have to read the first few chapters of Genesis and then read Romans 1. When God created man and woman, they were naked and they were what? Not ashamed. Just not ashamed. All right? Now when you get to Romans 1, where you've got men doing unnatural things with men and women doing unnatural things with men, what happens to the not ashamed? Goes away. There's shame.
Yeah.
All right? And I will still say, in general, when people that are doing unnatural things in their lives, when they say you're homophobic or you're a hateful person or whatever, they are projecting the shame that they inwardly feel and know onto you so that they can attack you as opposed to dealing with what's really going on in them that they know for a fact. Yeah. And then what else do we do that's an arrogant defiance of God? Destroying life, right? And now, well, we've got states that are in anticipation of Roe versus Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court. They are already enacting state laws that they can perform abortions right up until the time of birth, extending it, establishing it. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a place where we're defying God, right?
It's just gone so far, it has to be demonic. You can't even deny that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people are just possessed.
Yeah.
Their mind's been taken over.
And they're codifying it though. You know what I'm saying? They're making it the rule of the land, and it's like, see, that's defying God, and also attacking God's word and God's people. And even there, I had a history professor in college, and she said all truth is God's truth. So never be afraid of the truth. It'll always work out, even if at first it seems like it feels threatening. But she said all truth is God's truth. Well, what have they done with the truth in today's world? Yeah, truth is no more. It's whatever's going to further an agenda. Yeah. We're no longer concerned with two competing hypotheses and waiting to see which one is right. We silence the one we don't like and we promote the one we do. Okay, so anyway, we can see where we today have arrogance and defiance against God in many ways. All right? All right, well, let's look at our seventh paragraph, and then there's one more after that. So the seventh paragraph is verses 35 to 40, a sword against her. We're going to have a little bit of fun with this one. A sword against the Babylonians, declares the Lord, against those who live in Babylon, and against her officials and wise men. A sword against her false prophets, they will become fools. A sword against her warriors, they will be filled with terror. A sword against her horses and chariots, and all the foreigners in her ranks, they will become weaklings. A sword against her treasures, they will be plundered. A drought on her waters, they will dry up. For it is a land of idols, idols that will go mad with terror. So desert creatures and hyenas will live there, and there the owl will dwell. It will never again be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. As I overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah along with their neighboring towns, declares the Lord, so no one will live there, no people will dwell in it. Seventh set of questions. First of all, what does God say he is bringing against the Babylonian nation? That repetitive theme. He's bringing a what? He's bringing a sword. Now this is where we're going to work through some of these. In verses 35 through 37, what will God bring a sword against? And I underlined them for you to pick out. What is God going to bring a sword against? And what parallels can we draw for each one as to how a sword is being brought against America today? Because we can see each one of these, a sword is coming against our nation as well. So let's play with these. First of all, there's a sword against the Babylonians, declares the Lord, and against her officials and wise men. How is a sword coming against our officials and wise men? How are we seeing that?
They're believing their own lies.
They believe their own lies?
Bringing it to us.
Yep, and they're all going along with it. Yep. Okay. And by the way, they're no longer becoming wise. Hey, I'm pretty sure Kate probably saw this, or Joe Sue. Darby forwarded a podcast, and it was titled "The Narrative is Unraveling" or something like that. It was a video of a guy with real long hair, and he does spoof news reports, but with satire.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and I don't remember his name, but anyway, I just want you to know this. He is taking the facts, just the facts, and then he is mocking the experts with them. Okay, take a fact, mock the experts. And by the way, he will use taped statements, and he shows the video of their making their statements, and then every time they get done with a statement, he takes a fact and mocks them. And what I want you to know is this: government exists on its legitimacy in the minds of the people. And if you want to take down a tyrannical government, one of the tools that we have to take away their legitimacy is mockery. So all I'm going to say is, if we want to fight against America's enemies who are in power today right now in our government, who have infiltrated our government, and I sincerely believe they have, anytime you see something that mocks them, anytime you have a fact or whatever, you share that with other people. Because I guarantee you one thing government officials cannot stand is to be mocked. They cannot. And when I was in county government, you know how they attacked each other? By mocking each other when one of them was out of the room. I'm serious, to make them look like a fool. Because that they all have to be the expert. They all have to be perfect. They all have to be right. But their legitimacy as leaders, it all depends upon their appearing to be legitimate and taking away other people's legitimacy. And I saw it at the county level. And for instance, I watched a commissioner of social services mock the county sheriff about his policies and agendas. And it's like, not for nothing, but the sheriff has to get elected, and he has to be pretty dialed into what the needs of the county are and the people. So if I'm going to pick somebody that's smart and with power and authority, I'm going to go with the sheriff, not with some little commissioner playing in a little pond in a building. But she actually mocked him, and I couldn't believe it. You know. So all I'm going to say is, if you want to get under our political and expert people's skin, mockery is one of the single best tools, because it takes away their legitimacy. And if you can get the majority of our population seeing what a mockery they make of themselves with their foolishness, we're going to win. Serious. So don't be afraid to spread the mocking, especially if it's true and accurate. Okay? And it is. Like, for instance, I'll just give you a quick one. We've got a new head of the CDC. I don't know what the woman's name is. She's got black hair. But she was asked in an interview a certain question, and all they wanted to know was this. It was, can you update us on the statistics of COVID deaths, but also why in the last year the death rate of 19 to 49-year-olds has increased by almost 50%. Okay? And there's a huge spike in the death rate of people in that age group, age 19 to 49, and it should not be happening. So can you tell us what that might have to do with COVID versus, your death statistics? And she just, right over here. They're not, well, I don't know if they don't know. They're not going to look at it, or they're not going to talk about it. But point being, so then the guy goes and mocks them, see? And he just says, see, these people don't want to deal with the facts, with the answers. And for instance, take away the conspiracy theories, and a lot of us do believe in some sort of behind-the-scenes conspiracy theories, right? But point being, take away the conspiracies, just look at the facts, and get the questions answered. Why? Since we've started these wide range of vaccines and or COVID, whatever, why is the death rate increasing by 50% in the group of people that should be the most healthy and least likely to die in America today? Can we just get to that statistic and what the root causes might be? And he said, take away your conspiracy theories. Let's just look at statistics. And the other one is, we're only given case rates now in America today. Remember when we used to be given the death rate? What is the case rate of COVID versus the death rate? Why can't we get those two statistics and just compare them? COVID is really not that dangerous. It's not. But here's my point. This guy uses mockery. All right. So here's a great example of the fact that God is bringing a sword against their officials and wise men. And what is it? They're losing their legitimacy, and they certainly are not wise. They are not. Okay. Let's look at the next one. A sword against her false prophets. Who would be the equivalent of false prophets today? The media, I think. They do. They give us all kinds of crap information, right? And with the media, though, how is it that if you compare all the legacy media corporations, that you get the same news stories and different reporters, different networks, all cover the exact same news stories, and they use the same vocabulary words to describe them? So do we really have different media stations, or is it all one behind the scene? See? So how is a sword being brought against those false prophets? Well, how many people believe the media anymore? I mean, literally, their ratings are going in the toilet. Some of your recent surveys show that something like 75% of Americans don't trust or believe in what they're being told now. So a sword is being brought against the false prophets. See, the battle is the Lord's, and he's bringing it. How about a sword against her warriors? What would be the parallel there today? Our military is being destroyed. They are becoming political, right? And stop and think too, now they are trying to figure out which members of the military might be prone to being extremists, and they are rooting them out. But the one problem is, what's their definition of an extremist today?
The truth people.
What's that?
Somebody has a different opinion.
Yeah.
Anybody with a different opinion, and also people who are constitutionalists and patriots. That's who the extremists are. They're trying to root out, right? So is a sword being brought against our military today?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
Our military strength, we can't manufacture
Okay.
weapons like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. In fact, Kay's comment brings us to the next one. A sword against her horses and chariots. Well, back in the day, horses and chariots were the military machines, if you will, the cavalry, if you will. But today, our cavalry, our horses and chariots are ships and tanks and Humvees. How is a sword being brought against these, Kay? Lay it on us again. Oh, you're just saying we can't get parts?
Yeah, we can't make it.
Yeah, we don't manufacture these things anymore.
Yeah, the ports are getting somebody else's.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, the enemies who have infiltrated America's government, what do they do with the military machinery and equipment and guns that we produce already in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
They left them over there.
Yes. Isn't
Yeah,
that horrible?
yeah. And I'll never forget, President Trump was talking about General Milley. And he said, talking about planning, they were planning a withdrawal from Afghanistan. But General Milley said we should just leave all the tanks and equipment right there because it costs too much to bring them home. And Trump said, you mean you can't put a half a tank of fuel in each one and get them a few hundred miles over into Pakistan where we can take them home and whenever we want?
Yeah, and look at the ones that got killed over there. They was
Yeah.
sick.
So is there a sword being brought against our military and against our chariots and horses? Yeah, we're going downhill. And also, we are producing ships far slower than our greatest competitor, which is China. And we don't have the materials to complete them. Okay. All right. Let's see. One more. A sword against her treasures or treasuries. How is a sword being brought against America's treasuries or treasures?
It's common.
It's not worth anything.
It's being worth less and less. Your dollar buys less today.
Yes.
Okay? It really does. Yep. It takes more dollars to buy the same thing, which means your dollar is worth less. Yep. By the way, we have the gold standard. I always check whenever we hear financial news, I go to the spot price of gold and silver. I keep track of that because I sincerely believe that you'll know you're in trouble when the investors in the know on Wall Street dump their stocks and move into gold and silver.
Yeah.
And if you would have had an ounce of gold in, I think I went with 2018, the middle of Trump's presidency. If you had an ounce of gold or wanted to buy one in 2018, it cost you $1,200. Today it's 1,850 something. See, the dollar's getting worth less and less compared to the value of that which holds steady. Okay? Yeah. So, all right, so just to be aware of that. So, and also, so you got inflation going on. And also the world, by the way, is looking for alternative currencies. So what did we invent in the last few years? Cryptocurrency. And you know what cryptocurrency is based on?
No.
People's imagination. It's just, well, I've got this. It's worth because I have it and Joe Sue wants it. So I'm going to charge her for it, but it had no real value. And then Dale goes, wait a minute, Joe Sue's got some crypto. I want some too. You got any more? Well, yeah, but the demand's going up because now 2 people want it. So I got to sell it for more. You know what I mean? But it's all imaginary. But my point is this. The U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. But the nations of the world want to move away from it. They do. And sooner or later, they will. Okay. All right. So God said he was bringing a sword against Babylon and a sword specifically against all these areas. And all I'm going to say is if you'll just look around with eyes wide open, you can see there's a similar sword being brought against all these same areas in our nation today. We need to see that. All right? It's happening right before our eyes. Okay. Now, having said that, what a great segue into our last paragraph. Look! An army is coming from the north. A great nation and many kings are being stirred up from the ends of the earth. This is verses 41 through 46. They are armed with bows and arrows. They are cruel and without mercy. They sound like the roaring sea as they ride on their horses. They come like men in battle formation to attack you, daughter Babylon. The king of Babylon has heard reports about them, and his hands hang limp. Anguish has gripped him, pain like that of a woman in labor. Like a lion coming up from Judah's thickets to a rich pasture land, I will chase Babylon from its land in an instant. Who is the chosen one I will appoint for this? Who is like me and who can challenge me? And what shepherd can stand against me? Therefore hear what the Lord has planned against Babylon, what he has purposed against the land of the Babylonians. The young of the flock will be dragged away. Their pasture will be appalled at their fate. At the sound of Babylon's capture, the earth will tremble. Its cry will resound among the nations. So there ends chapter 50, and we're halfway through the judgment on Babylon. Okay? All right, our last set of questions under number 8. What is the one-word command God gives to the people in verse 41? Look. Look. Okay? What is it God is telling the people to look and see?
The army.
Yeah, the army's coming. Your end is near. Judgment's coming, right? It's right there before your eyes. Now, in verse 44, what 3 questions does God ask?
Who is the chosen one?
Yep,
Who is like me?
yep,
And what shepherd can stand against me?
yep. Bingo, bingo. God asked 3 questions. Yep. Who's chosen? Who's like me? Who can challenge me? And what shepherd can stand against me? Now, what kinds of things can we look and see happening in America today? I skipped that question. But what kinds of things can we just look and you can see it happening?
Destruction from within.
Yep, destruction from within.
Invasion from without.
Yeah, and invasions from without. Yeah, I like to call it the dismantling of America.
Yeah.
Our nation is being dismantled right before our eyes. So we probably don't need to flesh that out. We all know the things we can look and see, and it's happening right in front of us. It really is, okay? And so then we had the 3 questions God asked. And then, can anything that God has purposed or planned be stopped?
No.
No, you can't. You cannot stop what God has planned and God has purposed, okay? So, what do we know of God's plan for the history of the nations, and how does what we are seeing today play right into it? First of all, what has God planned and purposed for the history of the nations? What's He told us about in what the book of Revelation?
Life or death or
Yep, there's life and death, choices.
choice.
It's always that choice, but plagues are coming.
Yeah.
The nations are going to fall. Great times of turmoil. And instead of many nations, there's going to be what kind of a government? One world.
Government.
All commerce will be controlled from a central power, the Antichrist, right? Buying and selling will be controlled. Those who don't accept the mark of the beast or worship him will not be able to buy or sell. Or I might add, go to the doctor. Okay? So that's what God has already told us. Now, is that what God has purposed and planned?
The enemy has, but
God has
he's done
planned to
all-
let this time come. He has purposed it. He has planned it. It's part of the judgment. And in fact, every time you see one of the great bold judgments unleashed on the world, at the tail end of it, you're going to see a phrase, and yet they will not turn to me.
Yeah.
See, it's belligerent,
Yeah.
it's arrogant, in-your-face belligerence against God. Okay? So, again, you can't stop what God has planned or purpose. We already know how this is going to turn out with Armageddon and against Israel, and God's gonna come in and make all the difference at the end and save his people, and Antichrist will be cast down. We're going to be riding in here on a bunch of white horses to witness Jesus fell him with one little word by the power of his mouth, the sword that comes out of his mouth. Okay, so how does everything we're seeing today play into what God has already purposed? It's staging, isn't it? For instance, has there ever been a time in history when the whole world believed the same thing and did all the same things? COVID has brought that about, though. It has. And the way the response was, okay? Has there ever been a time in the world when it seemed like the whole world was taking the same drug?
No.
Or afraid of the same thing?
No.
And then, has there ever been a time in the whole world when, and this is happening in nations all over the world, where people can't buy or sell, see a doctor, or go to a restaurant unless they've complied with something governments have said? It's coming. It is. It is. All that technology is paving the way. It's coming. So, again, you can't resist what God has purposed or planned.
Well, you just said it earlier today when you said that about the woman that couldn't see the doctor. I said,
Correct? Yeah.
"How horrible,
Yeah. Yeah.
how horrible."
So we can't stop what God has purposed or planned. We already know how world history is going to go, and it's according to plan. God has already foretold us, but that God's going to intervene at the end. All right? It's all going that way. It really is. It's playing right into it. So, having said that, in light of what we see and now what we know, what do we need to be doing today?
We need to be worshiping the Lord and be praying and teaching and talking to other people about Him.
Yep. So Carol just ended it right there. We need to be worshiping. We need to we need to be praying and following, but then we need to be telling other people. That's all we can do. And then it's on them. But you can see it happen. Yeah?
God says in the beginning that he let their minds know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they turned against him and they don't want any part of it.
Yeah. Thinking themselves wise, they became fools.
Yup.
You know what really gets me is, they don't wanna listen, but when something happens, what is the first thing they say?
Pray for me.
Yeah. Pray for me, or oh God, help me. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I was reading in, I think it was Isaiah today.
Oh, really?
These people worship me with their lips, but their hearts are far
Yeah.
from me.
Yeah.
It's just lip service. Yeah. Yeah. And Kay, when people get disgusted with us, I say, well, we told them, and they're not really arguing with me, they're arguing with God. Because all I say is, well, the Bible tells us this was coming all along.
I say the Bible tells me.
And another thing too, I shared this with you before, but I'll just say it again to reiterate. I get upset over what's happening in our country today. I want to oppose it. I want to fight it. And yet, whenever I have these discussions with Wayne Schofield, Wayne will say, Dave, it's supposed to go this way. The more things get like this, the closer Jesus is to coming. So why be upset about it? He says, I think these are exciting days to live in. He really does. He's genuine in that. He says, these are such exciting days to live in because the end's getting closer and closer and it's coming together. You can see it.
I'm not real anxious to be a martyr.
Well, sure. And two, when we think about martyrdom, we don't get to choose how we die. It could be with a lot of pain. Terry has even said, I hope we don't see severe persecution. She says, I don't know how I'd hold up under pain. No, really. She says, well, what if I broke? And what if I denied the Lord or failed him in some way? Yeah, so she worries about that.
She has to endure to the end.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
And the way they're controlling us, everybody's paying for the technology to do it.
Yeah.
Themselves.
Yeah.
We're buying it.
And that's the ultimate deception, is to get us to fund and finance and facilitate our own enslavement and takeover.
Yeah, like Alexa and
Yeah, it's crazy.
cell phones.
Yeah. Yep, they say cell phones are the greatest spying device, period. And we've all got one, and whenever they want to tap into you, yeah. So, but again, just be encouraged. It's all playing into how God says this is going to go.
That's right.
So don't be afraid, because He's in control, and our Redeemer, He is strong. So worship the Lord and mock the enemy. I'm serious, mock him.
Absolutely.
Yep. By the way, even when the prophet Elijah was challenging the 400 prophets of Baal, and then there was 400 prophets of another idol too, so he's up on 1 against 800, but he was mocking them. When they were slashing themselves, making themselves bleed, dancing and yelling and crying out to their God and stuff. And he says, your God can't hear you. Maybe you should yell louder. And at one point, there's a phrase in the Bible that gets cleaned up. But in the original Hebrew, what it means is, what Elijah suggests is, maybe your God is out on the toilet taking a dump. That's why he can't hear you. In other words, he's mocking them.
Yeah.
And he's taking away their legitimacy. And he gives them until the time of the evening sacrifice. He says, okay, enough. Now it's my turn, because it's time for God's sacrifice. And just the evening had come. And boy, when the evening comes for America, when the evening comes for you and I, it's okay, enough. Now we're going to simmer down. And we're going to all get to see who is God. So, yeah. Well, that's what I've got for us tonight. Does anybody got anything you want to add? It was a long chapter.
That was an amazing chapter.
There's
Jeremiah.
a lot that goes on in here. Yeah, and by the way, Cy Shear, he says, Dave, I don't come to Bible study Wednesday nights, but I follow along and read and study on whatever chapter you're reading. But anyway, he says, we live in Jeremiah times. I'm like, that's what this book is all about. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up our Bible study and get ready to move into our prayer time. But for those of you who listened on the internet, Want to thank Joe Sue for posting that every week and getting it out there. And we hope you'll come and join us sometime. For instance, tonight, if you weren't here in person, you didn't get to have any of Carol Madison's chocolate cake with peanut butter frosting. You missed it. So you want to get yourself here. But we're glad you joined us. We love you. God bless you, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye now.